In Disney's stable of famous antagonists, there's one who's been around longer than all the others. He even predates Mickey Mouse, and that would be Pete. Sometimes he's a neighbor, other times he's a vicious authority figure. However, he has frequently made a memorable impression whenever he shows up to cause trouble, and he's had quite the evolution. Pete made his debut in Walt Disney's Alice comedies, where he was a bear. Originally named Bootleg Pete, he had a peg leg and would go after Alice for some nefarious purpose. When Disney started producing the Oswald the Lucky Rabbit cartoons, Pete became an adversary for the little bunny, and constantly schemed to beat him. After Disney lost the Oswald rights to Universal, Pete would continue appearing in the Walter Lantz-produced cartoons. However, that did not stop Disney and Up Iwerks from creating an extremely similar character. Their new villain was a cat, and he was Mickey's main foe in a number of the Mouse's early cartoons, most notably Steamboat Willie. In the Mickey Mouse comic strips, he was named Terrible Tom, until eventually being named Peg-Leg Pete in the cartoons. Even though Pete was still in the Oswald cartoons at the time, the Universal lawyers surprisingly did not show up on Disney's doorstep. Pete having a peg leg was an inconsistent part of the character, and was eventually dropped in 1936, much to the relief of the animators who could never remember which leg it was supposed to be. While Walt Disney and Pinto Colvig were his initial voice actors, his most famous voice belonged to Billy Bletcher. Bletcher brought a booming quality to Pete's voice, which made him the right contrast to Mickey's sweet-natured and higher-pitched pipes. Pete would take on various jobs, depending on the premise of the short. Sometimes he was Mickey's boss, and sometimes he was a criminal up to no good. One of Pete's most well-known appearances was in the 1940 cartoon Mr. Mouse Takes a Trip. In the short, Mickey tries to take Pluto on board a train, only for Pete the conductor to reveal no dogs are allowed. We see Mickey's continued attempts to get to his destination with his beloved dog, and Pete faulting them at every turn. Pete would also occasionally try to woo and also kidnap Minnie, leading Mickey to rescue her. It was not just Mickey that Pete interacted with. During World War II, Pete was Donald Duck's drill sergeant. Pete was an easy antagonist for the Disney artist to write for, as he was very flexible and could be plopped into any situation. The artist most responsible for Pete's evolution in the cartoons was the legendary Norm Ferguson. When Disney stopped producing shorts, Pete disappeared off the screen for a while, although he remained active in the comics. In Italy, where the Disney comics are enormously popular, Pete was a frequent villain. He returned to the screen in 1983 in Mickey's Christmas Carol. In this short, Pete took on the role of the Ghost of Christmas Future, who leads Scrooge to his grave. Will Ryan voiced the character there and brought the right level of intensity to his one line. Ryan also voiced Pete in episodes of DuckTales, who was different each time he appeared, although he still proved to be a thorn in Scrooge McDuck's side. Arthur Burkhart was the voice of Pete in the 1990 Mickey Mouse cartoon based on Mark Twain's The Prince and the Pauper. The captain of the guards, he discovers the switcheroo made by Mickey and the Prince and uses that to his advantage to try and gain power. Pete proves a menacing villain once again, with the short probably showing how devious he is. Pete's most memorable and most fleshed out depiction arrived in the television show Goof Troop. While not a straight-up villain in this, Pete is nonetheless portrayed as often scheming and with a terrible temper. In the show, he was also given a family and runs a used car lot. Most of the humor came out of his interactions with Goofy, who he is frequently annoyed by, especially when his friendly next-door neighbor screws things up for him. While Pete is often seen with his wife Peg and daughter Pistol, most of his family time was spent with his son, PJ. PJ is often shown as afraid of his father and what he might do to him, although Pete is largely portrayed as harmless in the show. Pete was perfectly voiced by Jim Cummings, who would become his official voice from that point forward. In a Goofy movie, Pete is shown to have a completely different job and family life than in Goof Troop. Pete is now working with Goofy in a department store as a photographer, with no explanation of what happened to his used car lot. Maybe got shut down for selling too many faulty vehicles? Pete is also shown on vacation with PJ, but with no mention of Peg and Pistol. I guess they divorced and Pete was the one to get custody of PJ. Pete eventually plays a major role in the plot when he sets in motion Goofy eventually finding out Max's plan to go to the Powerline concert. Although the question becomes whether he does this out of a certain respect for Goofy, because he wants to see Max get in trouble, or just for his own kicks. Probably all three. Pete appeared in the direct-to-video sequel, An Extremely Goofy Movie, albeit in only 2 scenes. We just see him at his barbecue making hamburgers and hot dogs for everyone, and also giving his own life advice to Goofy. Pete would return to his more villainous personality in the television series House of Mouse. He's the landlord who constantly tries to get Mickey's nightclub shut down, because doing so leads to him becoming the new owner. It always backfires on him, of course, but not without a few laughs along the way. He also became the captain of the guards again in the charming direct-to-video movie The Three Musketeers, starring Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. As expected, he plots and schemes only for him to get defeated, but not without some fun swordplay with the trio. Pete was also the villain in the short film Get a Horse, which cleverly recreated the style of the first Mickey cartoons. Archival recordings of Billy Bletcher were utilized for Pete, with additional voice work from Will Ryan. Pete would also play a role in the new Mickey Mouse series created by Paul Rudish. I love the zany and fast-paced nature of this show, with Mickey going back to his personality from the classic cartoons. Pete follows suit, and it's always great when these two old foes go up against each other again. Pete also appears in the popular preschool series Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and Mickey and the Roadster Racers, as well as several Disney video games. Some of his most well-regarded appearances among video game fans include the Kingdom Hearts series, Epic Mickey, Mickey Mania, and Disney's Magical Quest trilogy. It's remarkable that since his introduction in 1925, the Disney artists and writers still find new ways to use Pete. I'm sure if you were to count all of his appearances, he would be the most utilized villain in any Disney media. Whether he's plotting some evil deed against our favorite cartoon mice, or he's trying his best to keep his sanity while living next door to Goofy, Pete will always remain an entertaining presence. See you next time.